Alright, in this video I'm going to quickly show you how to make some minor corrections using a free software called MeshMixer that was put out by Autodesk. It's going to allow us to make some minor changes, typically for an ortho-relapse case or a case where a patient never had braces because their teeth were fairly close, but now they want to go ahead and straighten out a few teeth. I mean, this could be for teenagers and whatnot, but generally this is more of the adult crowd that has a little bit of relapse, particularly in the lower anterior and fairly often in the upper anterior as well. But you can see right here there's a little minor distal rotation of number 23, a lingual tip to 24, another distal, fairly severe distal rotation of 25. 26 is pretty good, maybe a little bit mesial rotated, but probably not enough to really worry about. You can see the canine's actually a little to the lingual, but we're not going to mess with that tooth with this because trying to move canines can be a bit of a pain. Those really long, stubborn roots don't move real well. So, I mean, it can be moved, don't get me wrong, but for this, we're really just going to focus on some incisors. So, first and foremost, we want to make sure that we're starting off with a really good model. And you can go through and inspect it all you want, but the truth of the matter is you may have holes that you don't even see or flaws. And also, a lot of times when you import it, it's hollow. So we want to go ahead and seal everything off, make it a watertight model, as they say. But to do that, there's a few different ways, but the easiest way I've found is to come over to Analysis, click on Inspector, and it's going to show you the different errors or flaws in the model. You can see that's actually pointing out 2 for this area, 2 for that area, and then one more over here. This is pointing actually to the entire base of the model. So because that's hollow as well. So we're going to go ahead and I want you to just kind of see this. This is the longest step as far as just sitting here waiting, because the computer's going to have to think a little bit, try to figure out how to fill these in. You have options of minimal fill, flat fill, and smooth fill. Smooth seems like a good idea because it'll keep everything sort of rounded. It'll look at the neighboring anatomy, geometry. But the problem is, if you do that, it has to close this off, and it tries to make a big rounded area. You end up with a base that is just it's not good. So just leave it at flat. Go ahead and hit auto repair. And now we wait. And like I said, this is about 60 seconds or so of just waiting while the computer figures out the best way to fill these areas in or to seal them off. But once you're done with that, I mean, I guess you could step away and refill your coffee cup or whatever. But once this is done, everything else is pretty smooth from here on out. What we're going to do next is we're actually going to go ahead and duplicate this model, because we want to make sure that we have a sort of pre-augmented shape and post, so we can compare, but also because we're going to use that pre-op to help design our actual model that is going to allow us to straighten these teeth out. So that's something that is easy to forget, but it is kind of like saving your work. If you don't do it, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. In fact, nothing will work if you don't. So anyway, real quickly, we're going to see the bottom. It's all sealed off. These little holes are filled in, and now we're good to go. I'm going to zoom out. A little bit of tips on how to use your mouse. First of all, get a third-party mouse, whether it's just a couple dollar USB mouse, a Bluetooth mouse, some other wireless mouse. Basically, you don't want to use your laptop mouse, because right now, if I right-click, that's what allows me to turn and rotate the model and tip and whatever. The left click is, of course, going to activate whatever tool I'm using. Sorry, let me hit done to close that window. And then the wheel button, of course the wheels in and out to zoom, but if I press that wheel button, it allows me to do this, to translate around. And that's very helpful, as you'll see. If you can only rotate and zoom in and out, you're going to be getting in times when you're looking right here and you just can't see this area. But if you just move, you can. Anyway, use an external mouse. Okay, so now that we've sealed the model, like I said, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this model. I'm going to come over here to edit. I'm going to hit duplicate, and done. So now I'm going to go ahead and rename this guy, this lower, to lower hyphen original. You can of course use whatever name you want, but and then lower hyphen aligned. So we're going to end up with two different models. I'm going to turn off the little, if I select this one or sort of activate the model, I turn this on and off, it just hides it, as you can see. So I'm going to hide it because I don't want to mess with that model. I'm only trying to mess with the lower aligned one. So now we are at a good point where we can actually start aligning these teeth. I would recommend that you go ahead and save now. Go ahead and file, save as, find somewhere to save it, so that if you screw up something, you can always come back. You've already sealed the model, you've already duplicated, you're ready to align. And honestly, if you're going to start aligning things and you're going to save again, I might save that a second time so that you can always come back to this base model and always start over from right here. Anyway, so now, if we need to bring that little view back up, you can either hit Control-Shift-O or just remember it's in the View drop-down. There's your surfaces. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to alignment. First, we're going to start with the number 23. I'm going to zoom in on this tooth. If you press the Select button, or if I hit Escape, it hides it again. If I hit S, the same thing, it activates Select. First of all, when the software first opens, it tends to start with it right in the about 50, right in the middle. It's a very big area you're selecting. Of course, this doesn't really help when we're trying to be precise, but to give you an idea of how that works, I'm going to hit Clear Selection, or you can hit just Escape. And I'm going to change this down to around 25, that area. This gives me a fairly workable, maybe just shy 25 area where I can kind of get into the areas and it's not so small that I'm taking forever. So I'm going to go ahead and start selecting this tooth. Now I want to stay inside the margin of the tooth. I'll show you in a minute why that's important, but you don't want to fall off too much. Okay? If you fall off to neighboring teeth or gingiva, just hit the Shift button and click again. That just allows you to essentially erase what you've just highlighted inadvertently. Don't be too picky. Getting that little triangle right there was not that important. That's just kind of showing you how picky I can be, and it's really not necessary. Okay, we've got that outlined pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and fill this in. Sure, you could increase the size of your area, but then you have to go right back and decrease it once you hit the lingual, so I don't bother with that. Okay, so now go ahead and get the incisal area so that when we look from the lingual, we're not too having too much trouble visualizing that. And don't be afraid to rotate the model. Don't try to get everything from one view, because all you're going to do is frustrate yourself and have to go edit a bunch of things. So if you need to turn it so you can get down in this area, then just turn it. Don't try to accomplish the impossible. Alright, so now we're just going to fill this in. And we're pretty good. Now you can use certain tools such as Smooth Boundary, which is right down here under Modify, but I don't find it really to be that important. That'll just basically, instead of having a jagged edge over here, it'll break these little triangles into smaller triangles, making it more of a smooth line. But in the end, it's really not going to matter for what we're doing here. So now that we've got it all selected, we're going to come over here to Deform, and we're going to click on Soft Transform, or Shift-T. And if you look, this fall off area is this area that surrounds the selected area. And you can see it right here. It's 1.5 millimeters is the default. It defaults different every single time. It just picks a number that it thinks it would be appropriate for what you're doing. For example, let's put it up to 5 millimeters just to show you. You can see it adjusts all this area. So if I try to rotate this tooth, obviously it's deforming these teeth, and we don't want to do that. We certainly don't want to do that. So I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that, and I'm going to change this to 0.75, and that seems to be the sweet spot that I found. Now you can pick your own size. You don't want to be too small, because then it starts to make a very sharp transition. You want it to be sort of a fluid transition. I'm not going to go through this entire thing. It's fairly, Okay, I guess I will. This little triangles help you to move in two planes. Obviously, it's between the green and the red, or so in one plane. Whereas this allows you to do one direction, and this allows you to rotate, and that's about it. You hit the white, it's going to scale the whole object bigger and smaller, and then if you hit the outside box, it's going to scale in that direction out bigger and smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and undo all that. So put this back to 0.75. The one other thing to see about this tool is there's a couple of guys, S and A down here, don't really worry about that too much, but L is for local, W is for world view. So now you're going to be rotating it within the axis or direction of here's bottom, here's top. And I think that actually tends to be a little bit better, because the local depends on how you select and how you highlight it, and sometimes it's just a little inconsistent. You can see it doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason the way this is shaped. So let's go ahead and click on world. And I promise I won't have to go through this in each tooth, this explanation, but for the first one I thought it might help. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to rotate it. And move it in a little bit. And we're pretty good there. The cingulum will move as the tooth rotates, so I'm okay with that. Probably have to do a little IPR, so I probably overlap this tooth a little bit, but based on the amount of crowding here, we're going to have to do some IPR if we're going to just move these teeth without expanding the whole arch. So that tooth looks pretty darn good to me, and I'm going to go ahead and hit enter or accept. And so that tooth is now positioned. If we come back over to this guy, and we now turn on this model, you can see where we've pushed this tooth lingually. You can see the corrections, if you will. So I'm going to turn that back off. Now we're going to go ahead and move this tooth. I'm going to turn that back off. Select has already been activated. I'm going to again stay inside the border of the tooth. Yes, this is a little tedious, but having done this many times in the lab with wax or composite, and I don't suggest using wax, because if you have to suck it down, then all your wax gets smoothed off and the anatomy isn't right. It doesn't work right very well, so at least not in my hands. But using composite, I mean, I guess one, that could be expensive, but we all have little samples of composite that we throw in our lab for that day when we need it. But more so, it's just using composite isn't the most precise way, first of all, because you think you're getting the right shape of the tooth, but are you really? Plus, I just prefer sitting at my desk doing it on a computer than doing it that way. And I can always get a new model because I'm going to save it, and I don't have to hope I didn't lose the model or anything. So press. I don't know if I said this already, but if you press and hold the button Shift, it'll do the opposite of selecting, deleting, and that's good enough. So we've got this tooth pretty well moved. I'm gonna go ahead and just make sure I'm cresting the mesial incisor or distal incisal of that. Okay. All right. So now we're gonna go ahead and hit Deform, Soft Transform, or once again Control Shift. Sorry, Shift T. I'm going to change this to 0.75. And I'm going to rotate this tooth. Okay. Now this is one that's going to have to come out a ways. Now we're going to have to tip it, but it's not going to be solely tipped. Because although we're not really torquing the roots, the cingulum is going to go lingual a little bit because the apex of the tooth is going to stay still. But anyway, so now we've got decent alignment there. I'm going to, yeah, it's fairly well aligned. I mean, I suppose I could tip it back just a touch. And good. Roots seem to be pretty close to the original position, which is important. And I'm going to move it over a little bit because, again, we're going to be doing some IPR here. And I don't want it to be all on this tooth or all in the mesial here. So trying to kind of center it in that space. And I feel pretty good with that. Once again, we can go ahead and turn that on. Control-Shift-O. You can see where we've moved this tooth. Let's turn that back off, and let's get this last tooth done. This is the one that's got that pretty severe rotation. Probably the most frustrating move we're going to have is going to be this tooth, as far as tracking it and watching it. But just takes a little bit of patience and explaining to your patient that you're going to have to kind of take some time, and just you don't know how long it's going to take. Probably only a couple months, but and maybe even just a few weeks. It just depends on how rigid that retainer is, how often they wear it, or the aligner or whatever. Compliance is paramount for cases like this, of course. Because when they can take them off, take them out, they will. That's why I'm a big braces user. But for a case like this, it's really hard to tell your patient, yeah, we're going to put you in braces, even if it is only for three months to have this corrected. Maybe 4 months, but even if it was that, they just don't want to have the braces on. Most don't. Especially with all the marketing Invisalign gets, when they know there's an option, they just want it to fit them as well, even though sometimes we know it's not an appropriate option. So anyway. Okay, so I am going to highlight a little bit of that back. So the more severe the rotation, a little bit takes a little more time highlighting and getting it all selected properly. But all right, pretty good there. Get a little more of this. These are just individual clicks. Each time it's highlighting little triangles. That's how the geometry is made up. It's all little triangles. Just want to make sure I didn't get any of that tooth. Okay, so now I'm pretty good with that. Let's go ahead and transform that. Once again, the alignment of this tool seems pretty obscure to me, so I'm going to go to World. Works a little better for me. I'm going to rotate this tooth into proper alignment. I'm going to shove it over here, kind of halfway to where I want it. Oh, I forgot. 0.75. That way we're not manipulating the other teeth too much. So I'm going to show you something that's kind of important to know in a minute, but I look like I'm pretty close. I actually would go a little more this direction, but the reason I'm not is look how far the root's moved. That's not going to happen with this tooth, but based on the tip of it, when you start to rotate it in that direction, it sort of sweeps the root out in a way. So we need to bring the root fairly close to its original position, sort of bisecting the fall off on either side. So that's where it was essentially in the lingual. Now, like I said, as you do rotate the tooth, the cingulum is going to sweep away, but we just kind of have to know what's realistic. And also, as I swung that over, the incisal ledge was no longer centered. So now I'm fairly centered. I know that my rotation mesial distal is pretty good. My height is fairly decent. I believe that I've tipped out a little bit. Okay, feel pretty good there. And you can see like the amount of that the lower third, the CEJ area, is actually swept a little bit to the mesial, whereas on the lingual it's gone about the same distance for the cingulum, and that makes sense because as this tooth rotates, the cingulum is going to move this way, and the facial aspect is going to move the opposite direction. So I'm pretty confident with that position is workable. Yeah, and that looks pretty good to me. I'm thinking that this might be a little incisal to the final, but I'm going to accept it. And now I'm going to go ahead and Control-Shift-O, turn this on and see where I was at. And now it's pretty much where it was, which is, I'm glad I didn't change it much. You can tell that it's tipped. So like I said, this is a tooth that is going to take the most patience. So now you can see you've got your before and after overlapped. And let's turn this off. I feel pretty good with that position. That's where we're hoping these teeth end up. Are they going to correct this much? I would say probably not completely, but at least now we know what we're aiming for. What you could do is, if you really wanted to torque this tooth, you could actually go ahead and use other tools in here to make buttons preoperatively. You could add a basically an let's show you how to, essentially using different shapes, rectangle or whatever. You could put basically a button on there so that as you're rotating the tooth, it stays. Of course, a cylinder wouldn't be real effective for tipping a tooth, but just to give you an example, things you can do. But in a case like this, for an example, I think this makes sense. So now we've got our before and after. But now, how do we actually make a model? Because if I just make a suck down off of this, it's not going to fit. It's going to hurt like crazy, but it's never going to fully seat. It's too much movement. You can do it with very minor movements, just do it that way. But for a case like this, we're probably going to have to use a number of retainers to progressively move the teeth. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to hold Shift, get both of them highlighted, and then I'm going to hit Duplicate. And I'm sorry, that didn't actually work. Delete. Okay, so I've got the original. I didn't have it on is why. You got to make sure that it's visual. So now Shift. Now we're going to hit Duplicate. So here's the duplicates, and now we're going to hit Boolean. We're going to hit Combine. I just hit it. Takes a second, and now we have one model that is both of them. It changes you can see the different colors in this model because it's just kind of showing you the surfaces, but they are not distinct parts. They are just kind of maps it out for you, which is actually nice because now if you were to print this off, I don't mean a 3D print, but print this picture right here, you could attach it to the patient's chart, and now you know where you're going to place buttons, little dimples with Essex style pliers, one that's going to push the direction here, one that's going to push here, and then one that's going to push through the gray there, and one that's there to help advancing this tooth into ultimately the purple position. So now you can see here's your combined model, here's the ideal model, and here's the beginning. So realistically, I would probably print all three of these. The before is probably the least important, but is a nice little demo or a model for you to check. If you have a stone model, you probably don't need to, but your aligned model, because in the end, when you're all done with treatment, you can check to see how close you got, but also you might be able to make a suck down off of that and sort of do a final little alignment based on the actual ideal final positions. But of course, this is what I would call lower working, because this is the working model. This is the model you're going to use to actually create your functioning appliance. Yeah, so that's about it. I hope this was helpful for some of you. If you have any questions, please let me know.